Additional aids and services are available to individuals with disabilities. To make such a request, please contact us by email, by clicking the Help tab in the PD portal, or at pdportal@tamu.edu, by phone, including Relay Texas at 1-800-441-7323, or in writing to Train PD, PD Portal Support, 4477 TAMU, College Station, Texas 77843. Both a transcript and accessible document of the content presented in this webinar can be found as resources in the course description. Click on the blue links under Course Resources in the description. When a link is clicked, a new browser window will open.
You are attending Manager Monday AEL Reporting in Tableau. The presenters today are State Director Mahalia Baldini, and joining her is John Bobian from the I3 department.
Thanks so much, Wendy and Anne-Marie, who's working the tech on the back end for us today. And thanks to all of you for joining us. John is joining us today, and he's been instrumental in how we're utilizing our team's data to support the creation of these dashboards in Tableau. So I'm grateful that he's here, and he's going to be sharing some information with you. And we've been learning as we've been going as well. Today, we want the takeaway for you guys to learn how to effectively use Tableau to better understand your enrollments data. We're going to discuss some tips and tricks for how you can work with Tableau, and ultimately, we want you to learn how to utilize Tableau and the data that is in there for your own analytical analysis. I mean, that's been the goal from the beginning, and it's going to take us probably several years to get where we really ultimately want to be with this particular platform. I wanted to provide a little bit of background before I turn things over to John, in terms of some of you may be brand new to AEL, and if you are, welcome. So I don't want to neglect providing a little bit of history here if you're coming into this brand new and you don't know what Tableau is or even what we're talking about. So we had about a year ago, a little over a year ago, rolled out the idea of utilizing the team's data that we have in our data system, in our management information system, and utilizing that data to create some more visualizations and dashboards. So the agencies have been doing this with several other programs. We kind of rolled this out in two phases. The first phase was really giving access to the Tableau visualizations to directors and supervisors specifically, letting them get in there and kind of kick the tires, play around with it a little bit. And that was back in January of 2022. And then in September of 2022, we let all the other users were kind of added into Tableau. And when I say added in Tableau, I wanted to let you guys know just how this really functions and how this works. So in order to really access the dashboards and the information that we have in Tableau, it's all connected to Teams. So those of you that are familiar with our state's data management system, Tableau is really connected to Teams. And so in order to have access to Tableau, you must first have access to our Teams system. Okay, so that's step number one if you're walking into this brand new. So if you have access to Teams, users back in January or September, depending on which phase you fell into, were sent an email to set up what's called an Okta account. Okta, think of Okta as kind of like the gatekeeper of Tableau. They're the ones that are gonna basically do a check and make sure, oh, should you really be having access to this information? So Okta is kind of that gatekeeper. So we sent out an email and we said, you really need to set up an Okta account if you want to be able to access Tableau. And we provided some instructions on how to do that. Now, several folks, you may be thinking, well, what data will I be able to see in Tableau once I have access? Well, that's going to be dependent on your team's access. So Okta and Tableau work together, and it mimics your role in Teams. So whatever access you have to data in Teams, that role is then mimicked in Tableau. So if for instance, you're an instructor right now in Teams and you can only see what's happening with your class and your students, that role is going to be mimicked once you get access to Tableau. So you will have the same level of access to that data. That was actually a big undertaking. Why it took, I think, a little bit longer for us to get this going is because we wanted to make sure that we were mimicking and replicating our permissions and our roles across both of those entities. So we didn't have more to manage than what we really needed to. Now, for those of you that have multiple logins to Teams, you will have the option once you get access that you'll be able to pick which role and pick which data you want to look at in Tableau, and it's going to filter it out for you. All of this has been some great features for us, and many of you are going in and you're utilizing and you're starting to utilize the system, and we're very grateful for that, and you've been providing us with some feedback as well. Just in case, though, maybe this is something you don't already have access to and you want to have access to it, don't think you are missing out. So we want to make sure that if you have access to Teams and you would also like to have access to Okta and be able to utilize the Tableau features, that we can get you set up. So the first step is if you missed your email to set up an Okta account, you can go ahead and do that. That's the first step, right? So we've given you an email address here. That's who you'll want to contact. You'll want to have your Teams login information and your Teams credentials handy. So they're going to need your whatever email you use to set up your Teams and your user ID and your login information, and of course the name to help get you an Okta account. Now, if maybe you did set up your Okta account, but you have forgotten your password, it's been a while since you logged in, maybe you've been locked out and you need to reset your password, you can get that going. So keep those things in mind just in terms of if you go through today's session and you're like, hey, I really want to be able to utilize this, there's a couple of things you're going to need to do if you aren't already using the system.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, Mahalia. So as she said, I'm John Bobian. I work in our data division, which is Information, Innovation, and Insight. Some of you who've been around for a while probably know us as DOI. We restructured last year, so been some changes, including the name to our division. So today I'm going to walk through the different versions of the enrollment dashboards that we have. Before I get into that, though, I want to provide some background information, going over what the enrollments report used to be, including the types of information that was there, and then talk about how that influenced the design of the dashboards themselves. And then I will be going to the dashboards and demoing those. So acronyms, I might be using these without thinking, just in case I do. Here's a list of them. EDW is probably the one that I'll slip up and use the most often. That refers to our data warehouse, which is essentially our database that hosts all the data that we use to feed the Tableau dashboards. So what is the enrollments report? In the past, we produced an Excel version of the enrollments report. So we did this by taking data from Teams. We'd process it in SPSS, which is a statistical software, and then we would output an Excel file. And that Excel file would be saved into a shared drive and be distributed from there. So in this Excel sheet, we had like separate tabs for each enrollment measure. We had grantee level information only. So we had the targets for the grantee and then performance for that grantee. It was updated once a month and then distributed after that. The report itself looked like this. So we have columns for like grantee and board. We have counts for how many hours somebody has enrolled, less than 12 or more than 12. Proportional status, proportional target, proportional percent of proportional target, and then status, target, percent of target, and needed for target. So as we started discussing building Tableau report versions of this Excel report, we used kind of this as the starting point. So we knew we had to include proportional target information, obviously the enrollment counts, and then the target and the performance based on that target itself. We got access to Tableau a few years ago, knew that it was going to be a good option for changing the way that this report was distributed and enhancing the information that's included in it. If you're not familiar with Tableau, just kind of a really brief description. It's an analytics platform that we use to create interactive visualizations. Basically, it allows us to take the raw data that would have been in that Excel report and you put it into like a web platform that's interactive. That, in combination with our enterprise data warehouse, which is also relatively new, we've been building out data in that for the last few years. We are now able to update and publish data daily. So that takes us to these Tableau enrollments reports. We have two versions. We have total enrollments contracted at the grantee level, and that goes from grantee all the way down to site for some information. And then we have the total enrollments contracted statewide dashboard. We'll go into specifics on each of those, but think about the statewide as the big picture. That's only statewide performance. It doesn't break things down past that. But then in the grantee version of the dashboards, you have the ability to filter data to a much more granular level, including all the way down to the individual participant in some cases. For these reports, the way they work is each day we pull the data from Teams and load it into our warehouse. This happens in the evening. The data is processed in the warehouse. We create some tables, including one reporting table that is then used to feed Tableau. And then Tableau pulls the data from these tables to create the dashboard itself. So as I said, two versions of the dashboards. The requirements for both of these are you're going to have an Okta account and you're going to have active Teams credentials, as Mahalia mentioned. And then based on what your Teams credentials are, you'll have more granular access in the grantee version of the dashboards. So there's a lot of information, a lot of data in these dashboards. So we have created some documentation to help you navigate them. So all of this is available on the AEL website. And we will be sharing this PowerPoint with the links afterwards. So the first piece of documentation we have is a Tableau user guide. This is just a really broad, like you've never used Tableau before. It'll walk you through some of the basics and describe the elements that you'll find within the dashboards. We then have documentation for both the statewide and the grantee dashboards. This is much more detailed. The document itself is 40 pages, but don't be intimidated by that. A lot of that is taken up by a data dictionary. So if you want more details about what is this column, where does it come from, and information about that, it's available in this documentation. So the dashboards themselves. So let us go ahead and start with the statewide version of the dashboard. So for here, I've already logged into Okta and I've clicked on the statewide dashboard. So once you log in to Tableau 1, which is our public Tableau server, you'll be presented with a visualization that allows you to just select the data visualization itself. But if for some reason you get thrown off that, you can navigate to it by going to Explore, clicking on Total Enrollments. And then in this case, we're only, for right now, we're going to look at the statewide version. And we're going to start with the Getting Started tab. And so what this does is actually takes us to the dashboard itself. On both dashboards, we have a similar Getting Started tab. Now, this just provides general information about the dashboard itself, as well as links to the documentation that I mentioned previously. So lots of ways that you can get to that documentation. The data part of this dashboard is in the statewide overview tab. So what we have here is all of the information for at the high level, so at the state level. So we have currently selected program year 21, and we have the enrollment measure selected as total enrollments for all fund codes. And this gives us a count of total enrollments across the state. We get the program year targets, the percent of targets, the performance status. And then below that, we have student information. So we have the count of active participants. So those are people who have reached 12 contact hours. We have distance learners, and then we have reportable individual counts as well. In addition to that, we have the account of new periods of participation by month compared against the monthly proportional target. So the proportional target is just the program year target divided by 12 in this case. So what this allows us to see is how we are performing overall as a state. And we have some filtering ability. So if you are curious, like want to be able to compare like your individual like site or class or grantee against statewide information, let's say you wanted to see how are you doing compared to the state in serving male participants who are Asian and have an associate's degree. So we can see across the state, only 36 people meet those filters for program year 21. And we can come up, we can look at a different program year to kind of see how that's changed. It looks like PY 22 is actually doing a little bit better. Using these filters, we're able to get a little bit more detailed information, but again, we're only looking at things at the statewide level. So from what I understand, this dashboard has primarily been useful for people who are looking at statewide performance primarily. I did want to demo it so that you can see like there are ways that you can use this to then compare yourself against the state as a whole based on like the filters that are available. So if I've selected these filters, there are a few things I can do to clear them. I can come up here, hover over them, and then there's a little button that says clear the filters. That takes us back to the beginning. We can also come up here and refresh the data source or back up using this little undo button. Clearing the filters is kind of the easiest way to do this. So this is the statewide version of the dashboard. If there are a set of filters that you find yourself using a lot, there are a few things you can do. You can print a PDF version of the dashboard itself. So what happens is if you wanted to get like an image of the dashboard, we can come up here to this little rectangle with an arrow down. And if we select that and then select image, it's going to download a PNG of the dashboard. So if you were creating, let's say like a PowerPoint, and you wanted to be able to include an image from the dashboard based on that includes a number of filters that you've selected, you can create that image using those buttons and then save it out and then incorporate it wherever you want to. In the statewide version of this dashboard, because it is statewide, we have to restrict the data downloads access because the background data is at the student level. So in order to show all these counts, we have to restrict the data downloads, which means most people cannot download the data. All right, let's go over to the grantee version. So a few caveats before I go on to this one. This is not an exact replica of the one that you will have access to. I've used dummy data to populate the dashboard. The visualizations are going to look kind of weird because the data is fake. So just keep that in mind as we go through it. The tabs and everything are the same though. And so as we go through, you'll probably start in the getting started tab. Very similar to the statewide version. The biggest difference is we have a note about the security because we do allow data downloads from this dashboard. And because of that, we're restricting the information that's shown a little bit more. So when you log in, the data set itself is being filtered based on your login ID. So in the statewide version, that doesn't happen. So that's why we see the total count across all providers, sites, classes, grantees. We get the overall statewide information. But in this dashboard, we're using your login information to restrict the data. So some of the visualizations are going to populate a little bit differently depending on what your level of access is. So let's go and start. When you log in, if for some reason you're getting nothing to populate in here, like it's all blank, the first thing you want to do is check this filter at the top. For the purposes of this demo, I've created a user that is at the director level. So what that means is I can see all the information for a single grantee. So in that case, this is grantee 1. If you have multiple Teams roles connected to the email address, those multiple rows will show up here. If you are, let's say, a staff reader in Teams, and you have only access to one class, your total numbers are only going to be related to the students that you have in your class. So again, as Mahalia mentioned, you'll only see the data that you have access to in Teams. So that gets a little tricky in the performance tab, but we'll be there in just a second. So Teams role, really important filter. Make sure that you have selected the appropriate role. And then you'll see we have similar filters as we did on the statewide version. So we have some of these demographic filters: age, gender, race, education, location. But then we also have kind of the big filters. So selecting enrollment measure, fund code, and then also grantee and provider. So we add those from the statewide version. And then we have program year and month. The visualizations themselves in the enrollments tab include, unsurprisingly, a count of whatever measure you currently have selected. So in this case, I have total enrollments, but if I select IET, it's going to change that. So we have the currently selected measure, and then below that, we have total enrollments. So we did this so that you always have a number to compare the current enrollment measure that's selected against. So IET enrollments is 134 of 2,307 total enrollments. We also include a map for counties served. So in this case, this demo data has like all counties in it. So everything's blue. In your version, that when you log in and take a look, you'll have specific counties that are selected based on the sites that are included in your data set. So let's say I'm a director for Grantee 1, and let's say like Grantee 1 is Houston. So we would have just Houston would be blue over here, and everything else would be white. We also have enrollments over time. So this is a count of active participants versus new periods of participation. So kind of showing you how many people you have active in programs versus how many new pops have been starting in that month. Again, this is dummy data, so we don't quite have the same sort of trends that you would see in your actual data set, but I can tell you in the overall data set, what we see is like generally spikes when you would expect them. So spring and fall for new pops and active participants. And then we also have a table here showing direct contact hours, less than 12 hours, and then also 12 or more hours by provider and site. So in this case, as a director of Grantee 1, I am seeing provider 100, and then all of these sites associated with them, and then provider 110, and then the sites associated with them there. I can also come up here to the filters, and I can select, let's say I only want to see provider 100. When I select them, it's going to filter some things down, and then we can change our enrollment measure, things like that. So lots of ability to kind of filter things down. If you are someone who has access to just like a single class or a single provider, your provider filter is going to default to just the one that you have available. Sometimes, I don't know why, Tableau breaks a little bit and it won't default select your provider or your grantee. So you might have to come in here and select them manually. All right, so that's the enrollments tab. Next, we have the performance tab. Performance tab allows us to see our performance over time. Because I had selected intensive enrollments on the first tab, it's carrying it over to the second one. So let's come back to total enrollments. Again, my data is going to look a little bit weird because it's dummy data and like the targets are the same across measures and stuff like that. So numbers are going to look a little strange, but the dashboard itself is going to look the same for you. So here we have the currently selected enrollment measure, and we have the count of the participants, and then we have the program year target, and then we have the percent of target, and then we have performance status. And if you have questions about how any of those things are calculated, we have that included in the documentation. And below that, we have a similar visualization to that what's on the statewide version. We have the number of new periods of participation compared to the monthly proportional target. Just to kind of give you an idea of how your service compares to what the target actually is. So if we're consistently below this red line, it means we're not going to probably hit that full target because we need to be above the line, because the line represents the program year target divided by 12. All right, and since performance is only calculated at the grantee level, meaning we don't, as a state agency, we don't have provider level targets, we only have grantee level targets. It's my understanding that some grantees do set targets for providers and sites and stuff like that, but because we don't have that information and we don't plan on including that information, we don't include it in the dashboard. So the performance portion of this grantee level dashboard only goes to the grantee level because we only have grantee level information for targets. In some cases, you'll see this red line will get a little wonky. Sometimes it'll like dip down or dip up. That'll happen if you don't have any participants in the data set. So let's say like for some reason in 2022 for total enrollments, we didn't have any participants for April. We would see this red line dip down a little bit because the way that the data set is set up is the target is getting pulled from each row, which requires that there be a row of data in the data set. So if we don't have any participants for that month, then they won't show up. So that's the performance tab. We also have the participant view tab. So I have a feeling this is the one that a lot of people are using the most. What we have here is the ability to select or find participants and POPs that meet certain criteria based on the filters. So if we're looking for a very specific subset of participants in our, let's say, class or site, what we can go through is we can select. So if we want everyone who's in total enrollments, but is only receiving funding through basic AEL for provider 100, for sites, let's say 1,000. We want to look at all classes. But if we want to filter it down more and say, let's look at people who are just 25 to 44, who are just female, who are Hispanic or Latino, with an associate's or let's say a high school diploma or equivalency. You can see as we're selecting these filters, the data set itself is filtering down quite heavily. As we start getting past these like demographic filters, what we have are what I think of as status filters. So as part of WIOA requirements, we have to gather some information on like statuses of the participant at program entry. So that includes things like cultural barrier, disability status, ELL status, ex-offender status, things like that. So we've included some of the top ones here in this participant information tab so that you can further filter down data. The options are kind of what you'd expect. So we have a missing. So what this means is if for some reason when the team's information was filled out, if this was not answered, it will show up as missing. If it was filled out as yes or no, it'll show, and then did not disclose is also an option in addition to yes and no when filling out the information. So we have all four of those options. So let's say cultural barriers, yes, and now there's nothing showing. What this means is we filtered down the data a little bit too far. So let's say this is good enough for where we're at. What we can do is, if we know this is something that we're going to want to look at a lot, Tableau gives us the ability to save what are called views. So up here on the top bar, you'll see something that says view and then a colon, and then in this case, it says original. Original because I have not created any views here. But let's say I wanted to save this information so that I can quickly and easily come back without having to select all those filters myself. And I can just like click one button and it'll bring this back. What I can do is create a custom view. So let's call this custom view basic AEL with filters. And then what we can do is we can save it. You do have some options when saving it out. You can make it your default. So when you load in the dashboard, it'll automatically have all the filters applied that you've selected. You can also share it with others, which would allow you to basically like let other people use the views that you've set up. So once we have that view saved, what we can do is we can kind of come up here, we click on view, And now, in addition to the one that we just created, we have original again. So if I select that, it will take us back, and we had no filters selected. One thing to note about this participant information tab is it's pulling in a lot of data. So sometimes it can load a little slower than the other tabs. Maybe you notice there, like it took it a minute for it to load in some of the data. Just give it a few extra seconds. It usually comes through. If not, it'll throw an error in the server and let you know like it failed to load the data. That's pretty rare though. All right, so that's creating a custom view. It's a really, really useful tool. So like if you find yourself like you're wanting to look at a specific subsection of participants over and over again, you can create views for it. So if you need to like look at a specific year or month, or a specific enrollment measure or fund code, like you have the ability to save these views and then be able to quickly load it without having to go back and manually set filters. That's the dashboard itself. Views is a really good tip. I definitely recommend you take a little time and set up some views of things that you know that you have to answer or find data for frequently. Because what they let you do is once you have them set up, it makes it really easy to download data sets quickly. So there's a lot of different ways to download data in Tableau. So I showed you the image version. You can also do a PDF or even PowerPoint download. And what that does is it's very similar to the downloading the image. It'll pop up a little download at the bottom of your screen or your browser. And once it's done, it'll generate like a PowerPoint pair of slides. And the first slide is like information about the dashboard. And the second slide is the tab that you're specifically looking at. So again, it's kind of a useful tool for being able to share the information with people who might not have access to this Tableau dashboard. But in the grantee version, we also have the ability to download data. So again, up in the top right, we have the little rectangle with the down arrow. We select that and then go to data. And right now, it's showing nothing. That's because I haven't clicked on any specific visualizations. So if for some reason you try to download something and it pops up as nothing, it's because you don't have anything selected in Tableau. So let's come over here. I just have to click once on this table. Nothing changes. It just shows, it doesn't highlight anything or anything like that. But because I'm inside that visualization, I can now view the data that is used to build that visualization. So this is the easiest way to download data sets from the dashboards themselves. So in this case, it's going to give us all the information in an easier way to like export. We do have the ability to also, we can look at the way that it comes from the data source itself. So if you wanted like the table version, in this case, my data source is called demo tech. So demo total enrollments contracted, which is a table that I built in our warehouse to hold the dummy data that's populating the dashboard. So if I select that, what I get is the tabular version of the data set, meaning each column is a specific variable. If you wanted to do your own analysis in Excel or in Tableau or wherever else, if you wanted to, you could select the visualization you want to pull the data from, download the data, select on the data source, and now you have a tabular version of the data set that you can just come up here in the top right and hit download. Depending on the visualization that you select, the data set that's available will be different. So let's select this count of the currently selected enrollments measure and performance. If we select data, all we get is the participant count. But what we can do is if we select a little bit more detail underneath the summary. So summary is where you go by default, and then below that, it'll include selectable variable names of the variables as they are named in Tableau. And that will include all of the data that's related to that variable. So in this case, we have a bunch of dummy IDs for program years, and then we have whether or not they are participants in a flag field. So that's downloading data. The thing that happens most often is people are like, I can't download data for some reason. So I keep going up and selecting data to download, and it's just coming up empty. The reason it comes up empty is because you haven't selected a visualization. It doesn't necessarily mean the visualization has to be highlighted. So you saw just there, I just clicked generally on the visualization. And when I select data, it pulls up the data source. And again, I can get a little bit more information by selecting individual variables if I want that, or if I want like the full tabular data set, I can just click on summary. So that's downloading data. The last little tip I have for you is that we occasionally get questions about how do I log out of the dashboard? Unfortunately, you can't log out from Tableau. You have to go back to Okta and log out of Okta to be logged out of the dashboards.
Susan says, I noticed my team's reports counts by location aren't consistent. Where is the most accurate place to look for participants with 1 or more hours for a specific location for the year?
The Tableau dashboards are slightly lagged. So we download the data from Teams starting around 6 p.m. every night. So let's say if for some reason somebody updated information in Teams around 8 p.m., that is past our cutoff time. So that won't show up the next day in the dashboard because the dashboard updates about 4 a.m. So there's a little bit of lag in the Tableau dashboards. And depending on how consistent staff are when inputting data, like it could feel like 2 days, depending on when it's done. If you're wanting site-specific information, the participant view tab is the best option. Depending on your level of access in Teams, you may or may not be able to see multiple sites.
In terms of like, Susan, if you're wanting to get, like you have multiple classes at an individual site, I would probably use Tableau for that. Even with the nightly interface, if you're just trying to get a sense of how many classes are at each individual site, this would be an easy way to go. And then you can see the actual participants and the site names all together and the contact hours associated with each participant in each class at each site, if you wanted to download the data from Tableau.
Yeah, because you could even take it so far as to create views for each one of those sites or classes within Tableau.
After creating like a custom view, how do they go back to just getting the original view?
When you come back up here and you select on view, it saves one that is called original parentheses default. So you just come back in here and you would select that, because what it'll do is it'll save the custom ones that you create under my views, and then under other views, it'll have the default. So you can always get back to the default by going there. You can manually clear filters to like get back to it as well. Going back to the default view is the easiest way. We're planning on building more Tableau dashboards. We always enjoy getting feedback. So if you also have feedback on this dashboard, if you have questions or find any bugs, because the data changes, we change a lot of things from program year to program year as far as like grantees and enrollment measures and funding sources. So it's possible we'll miss something in our testing when we make updates. So if you find a bug, let us know and we'll work on fixing that as well.
We hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded webinar. After you have passed the final test with a score of 80% or greater and have received your certificate of completion, please take a few moments to complete the course evaluation. Participant feedback helps Train PD at TCall continue to provide high-quality professional development. To leave a course feedback, please go to the completed portion of your transcript. To do this, hover over the My Learning tab and select View Your Transcript. Click on the drop-down arrow next to the word Active and select Completed. Then, click Evaluate in the drop-down menu next to the course you just completed. Please note that your feedback is greatly appreciated.